Yet again, through a haze of Payday 3 misery and bad news, the PC version of Payday 2 continues to carry the franchise as the three-man Sidetrack Games team have once more put out an incredibly tightly packed free update, touching on almost all facets of the game and improving them with the sort of community insight that only comes with years of experience iterating on something. Technical improvements to issues that have plagued the game and some of its best and most expansive heists for years, alterations to one of the most widely despised enemy types in the game, and sweeping adjustments to the controversial damage range multiplier system, which basically just shafted some of the least deserving weapons in the game. All this in addition to dozens of tiny additions which showcase the attention to detail this team is developing a reputation for, seamlessly improving the loot system on some of the game's most monotonous heists, and adding tiny mechanical adjustments to even improve 12-year-old classic heists. In isolation, Update 243 might not look as impressive as a new heist, weapon or perk deck, but in aggregate, these are all steps towards improving Payday 2 on PC, beyond even its heyday, with fixes and improvements a decade in the making. This is my escape from the reality that is the modern Payday franchise, so let's dive into those patch notes. I think it makes the most sense to start with the hugely impactful changes, which just about every player will appreciate. We all know Payday 2 has memory issues, they plagued my last challenge run on ResMod, and have consistently made some of the game's best heists a drag to play through. But as of this patch, at least in my several hours of testing both solo and alongside the Sidetrack team in multiplayer lobbies, I haven't faced a single crash related to memory issues, and that's all whilst playing the game on high texture fidelity. Although it's hardly a modern looking game, you will at least be able to run it on non-dirt settings without fear of an impromptu crash ruining your experience. Most importantly though, memory-intensive heists, particularly those released in recent years, are back on the menu, with the likes of the White House, Bullock's Mansion, and Black Cat all back in my personal rotation, now the worst of the memory issues appear to be fixed. A massive technical improvement that's been a long time coming. It also arrives alongside the addition of a borderless windowed option as standard in your settings menu, something that was previously locked behind the installation of a mod, just like the expanded FOV slider, which now comes with a traditional numeric display, meaning you actually know what FOV you're playing on accurately. There are problems and omissions that have existed for long enough in Payday 2 that community members have developed their own widely adopted solutions, but it's great to see them being addressed directly within the game itself. And pivotally, even if things do crash, as they inevitably will with all your filthy body pillow mods installed, Sidetrack have built in their own in-engine crash handler, making it infinitely easier to work out the problem mod or conflict and report potential bugs, rather than needing to delve deep into the old crash log text file, pointing you in the right direction immediately. Another quality of life improvement that has genuinely wide-reaching implications for your game experience, especially if you're interested in the mod scene. Enough on the technical front though, this isn't what most of you tune in for when it comes to my usual update coverage. No, you want to know the juicy gameplay changes, so let's start with the assault on everyone's least favourite unit, the occasionally immortal, always disorientating Marshall Sheild. These guys have been heavily nerfed to provide a more enjoyable and consistent challenge. Not only have they made it so that they can be killed through their shield by high damage snipers and explosives via a short delay on their invincibility effect, they've shortened said invincibility after a shield break to a much more manageable duration, without them necessarily getting deleted before they can fight back. Additionally, their shield's aim test hitbox to interrupt the flashbang effect has been widened, making them easier to stun, and their shotgun's concussion effect now falls off over range, meaning your ears won't be ringing from halfway across the map. A flat improvement pretty much across the board, whilst Marshalls still offer a unique challenge, they're much more manageable than ever before, which will be a relief to most players out there. That being said, this update's adjustments are all in the player's favour. Spawns have once again been ramped up, although this time in a more logical way. Now spawns are based on the number of heisters in the lobby, in addition to team performance and kills per minute. Whilst it's slightly fake difficulty scaling I suppose, punishing you for being particularly lethal and efficient, it does avoid extended periods of downtime, which was the prevailing complaint after the last update slowed down those spawn group cooldowns. Keep in mind this is an interim solution to buy the team time to start developing spawn systems set to each individual heist, which is exactly how it used to function at launch, if you can believe that. This means that at times they can be slightly overwhelming, especially for slightly less kill-heavy builds, but I'd say it's a decent compromise for where the game is currently at. You might have also noticed as of the last patch that the Commando 101 has been performing ever so slightly worse. This nerf went into the last update by accident, so that is definitive proof the Sidetrack guys are mortal, going from 6,200 damage to 3,900. Except it turns out that was just intended as a prophylactic balancing adjustment for a general buff to all explosives, which are now dealing 2 times damage to dozers rather than the 1.1 times multiplier they used to have. What that means for the Commando is still 2 to 4-shotting most dozer types on Death Wish and Death Sentence, whilst also still 1-shotting everything else, even cloakers with their 3600 health. The reason for this explosive buff is to give them a marginally better matchup into dozers, seeing as they can't headshot, with the RPG in particular appreciating the buff as it's retained its niche as a one-shot killing option, even against the big guys. The Commando honestly doesn't mind it either, but I appreciate the balance change was supported by an appropriate nerf, unlike in Payday 3, where upcoming changes seem to stumble over each other. For example, buffing cop health in the very same patch they nerf ammo pickup, which is expressly unfun, but I digress. Speaking of notoriously unfun balance tweaks though, let's talk about damage range multipliers. I understand why they were concepted in the first place, granting Starbreeze what essentially amounted to an extra axis of balance, giving certain weapons in a category uniquely solid or poor damage over range. In practice though, this just made a bunch of the game's least utilised weapons even worse, totally failing to impact the core meta, instead making less popular builds worse than they ever needed to be. This damage falloff over range has been tapered off at a much more tentative rate now, meaning it's not half as oppressive as it once was, especially for the likes of pistols and SMGs, which really felt the brunt of the initial system's addition. Whilst I lack the detailed statistics to be more specific, anecdotally, akimbo pistol builds felt much more consistent across all combat situations than they did prior to the change, and I imagine the same is true of SMGs and shotguns. This is effectively a reversion of one of the least popular changes to the game in its past 5 years of development, giving a number of weapons a new lease of life, and hopefully cheering up a few old heads disappointed with those gameplay regressions made during the revival era. Pistols will also appreciate a minor tweak to their core skill Trigger Happy, which can now re-proc whilst active, meaning it can be kept up at all times much more consistently. There's also been a slight nerf to the Compact 40 grenade launcher, increasing its reload to the intended 3.1 seconds, up from 2.5 seconds, which didn't even match the animation, in addition to Sidetrack's first actual content drop. Yes, you heard me right, although I think it might have been more of a case of enabling something in the files rather than adding it, as the Mark 10 SMG now has access to a folded stock, giving it an extra concealment option. The first of many additions, I suspect. Moving on to Heist, there have been a number of impactful mechanical and visual tweaks made across the roster, with the most relevant being the expansion in functionality of many of the game's loot ziplines. Rather than these just being used to funnel bags across wide open spaces, now they can also be used by the player, creating new mobility options around the heist and assisting with the loot moving process. This is a massive improvement, as previously ziplines were either categorized into player or loot bag movers. Now some can be used for both, you'll start seeing Heist being played in totally different ways, making it much easier for solo players to move a set of bags without needing to worry about how they're going to follow them, or in some cases, such as on Big Bank, making a previously unpopular escape option, as with the rooftop escape, infinitely more viable. Subtle, but actually a huge addition, especially without a way to move multiple bags at once, as with Payday 3. Similarly, Shadow Raid has received a new RNG variation, with another method of gaining access to the roof, now sometimes in your run seed. These ventilation units will be scalable, meaning there's even more variation for Payday 2's premier sandbox heist. There's also a number of minor yet thoughtful additions to some of the game's older heists. For example, instead of entering the void when breaking into the fire-starter trucks, you'll be greeted by actual lighting and props on the inside, making it easier to spot the weapons cases we're looking for. Framing Frame has also gone through a similar quality of life pass, with vision blockers now in place, which means you won't get spotted unfairly and unrealistically for looking down through the skylights on day 1 or day 3, in addition to a number of visual bugs and irritations being ironed out whilst they're there. And this really does exemplify Sidetrack's game development style, which I understand plays into their new studio name. An attention to detail that leads to getting sidetracked and fixing or addressing minor issues people had with the game for the past decade or so, instead of only thinking of the big picture. It's something you have the luxury to do when your updates are consistently ready on time and thoroughly tested with an impeccable release cadence. Proper additions for the love of the game, so to speak. I'm just so happy this talented team is able to do this gig full time from here on out. Finally, there are a few miscellaneous tweaks you might appreciate, with legendary weapons now being somewhat customizable on parts that aren't necessarily key to their unique design. The Obsidian Plates list of secret achievements now only containing achievements an account could potentially complete, meaning any locked behind now lost IPs or DLCs will not show up on profiles too new to have access, so players will no longer be potentially locked out of completing a secret. Finally, for those of you who still haven't heard Wolf's incredible new Ulf voice lines, or simply weren't able to hear them due to their low volume, that is now fixed, with a number of voice lines in the game now rebalanced to be audible, even above the sound of gunfire and explosions.
Medic spotted! Took care of the medic! Medic down!
Genuinely, in what is a miserable landscape for this franchise right now, after all those promises of Payday Focus and a new era for the live service, Sidetrack and Payday 2 are the only things keeping me going making content, full stop. I am so grateful for the breath of fresh air that is these updates. Few things avoid their gaze, and it feels as though the game is getting marginally better with every update, without stepping on any toes or really warping what made it successful in the first place. A really sustainable way to build on one of the most beloved titles within the Steam ecosystem, and at this point, I say the audition is over, it's time to roll on the real content. I am incredibly excited for what's to come and wish the guys the best of luck in navigating the tricky Payday situation at the moment. That's it for today's video though. Be sure to check out my Apex Gaming PCs range, still available from the link at the top of the description. Have a great week, enjoy the update, and I'll see you all very soon. A huge thank you to my dedicated Patreon backers. If you want to join this crew in going infamous, check out the link below and pledge as little as $2 to see your name in the credits, or get 24-hour early access to future videos and vote on upcoming content. Take care, I'll see you all soon.